Welcome to Mod 3, where we're going to be talking about an introduction to networking. The following agenda, we're going to have 4 sections in this mod. First one being network organization, moving into devices and IPs, going into network protocols, and then section 4, we're going to wrap it up with general networking concepts. So, we'll dive into section 1, network organization. Starting with LAN, WAN, and MAN. So these are important terms for you to know and be aware of, starting with your local area network. You can think of this as your house or whatever local intranet you're on. It's going to be a network that covers a small geographical area, such as a home, office, or a campus, typically owned, controlled, and managed by a single organization or an individual. Some examples would be Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. So if you're home and you're on your phone and you're connecting to something via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, that's all going to be within your LAN. It's your local area network. So you can kind of think of your house as just an area to have a local network. And when you start to think about connecting maybe 2 homes together for communication, this becomes a WAN. A WAN is a wide area network. So it's going to cover a larger geographical area, such as part of the country or really the world. And as you have more LANs come together, they make up our wide area network. So all of these communicating together, this would make up a WAN. A bunch of LANs make up a WAN. And it's going to be operated by multiple organizations and your internet service providers. And another point to note is that it may operate at lower speeds and higher latencies due to the longer distance involved. We're going to talk about this later, but stronger signals can happen if the 2 points of where the data is communicating have a shorter distance. And there is limitations for how much data strength or data signals or overall transmission of the data. The strength will have limitations based on the underlying hardware associated to it, and we'll talk about that more when we move into the cables section. Apart from LAN and WAN, you should also be aware of the term MAN, a metropolitan area network. So this is going to cover a geographical area larger than a LAN, but smaller than a WAN. And we want to think of a city or a region. And you can have connectivity to multiple LANs or other networks in the area. And examples of metropolitan area networks include fiber optic networks and microwave links. So think about these 3 terms just in general, the sense of size, and when we're talking about communication as it relates to geographical areas for what they can span, LAN being the smallest, WAN being the largest, and then a MAN, somewhere in the middle, to have an intermediate step of the type of network you can have. Being aware of some of the network topologies would also be a good starting point. Just putting up this image here, just so that you're aware that there's different types of topologies you can have for how your communication is set up. You can have point-to-point, which is just 2 computers. You can have a bus. You can have a ring where everyone can only talk in a circle. Sometimes you have a token to say if you don't hold the token, then you can't speak. But network topologies, just think of them high level about how the computers are able to communicate with each other based on different structures. So based on how your topology is set up, that is based on how your computers are going to be able to communicate. So for example, if we had a ring topology and this host wanted to talk to this host, it would have to follow this structure. It would have to go through this host and this host first in order to get to here. Whereas if it was set up in a mesh topology, which is one I would probably out of all of these, just remember you can have a mesh topology as most modern networking schemas. Any computer can talk to any computer as all of the lines are open. They're all meshed together. They don't have to go in a circle. They don't have to follow the line in a bus. They don't have to follow a hierarchical structure like a tree network topology. Mesh is anyone can talk to anyone all lines of communication are open. And then you can also combine different network topologies to have a larger network organization. So this one could be point to point, and then you also have a mesh topology going on here, and you can have like a hybrid type deployment for your network. Is this going to come up on an exam or knowledge for you to want to know and master? No, but you should have a general, really high level overview of the different type of network topologies over there. Mesh is the one that I would remember, and the different limitations that go for communication with endpoints if they're in a certain network topology, and some of the limitations around them. That's all. Moving into cables. Now, this will be taught to you again if you're going through the CompTIA A+ certification, but definitely if we're going to cover networking, we have to talk about cables. Starting with your coax cabling, this is going to have a copper conductor right here, surrounded by a layer of insulation, the braided shield, and an outer layer of insulation. Commonly, you know coax if you've had an internet service provider come out to stand up your modem and router or your cable. This is where the type of cable that they're using is coming in handy. They're going to be using copper as the core middle component in your coax cabling. So you screw this into the wall. It has that circular adapter at the end of it with the little prong that sticks out, that copper prong, and you plug it into your wall that has the existing point to have a coax cable go in. And this is probably the cord that comes out and then goes to your router or modem or out to your cable provider. So think of this for the most important thing being it's got that central copper conductor. It's commonly used for cable, internet access, and other applications where high bandwidth and long distances are required. When we talk about cabling, we want to think about how long can the signal go for, what kind of material offers me a faster transmission of the data, and we want to pick the right cable for obviously security, but also use of function. So coax cabling may be on the cheaper side, and it may be able to go several kilometers, but it's going to be slower of a transmission of data compared to like a fiber optic cable that uses light. And we'll talk about fiber cables in the next slide. But as a high level, when we talk about cables, just think about their core components, what they're commonly used for, and which one may be faster and which one may come with a longer distance of being able to transmit the data. So that's coax. We're pretty familiar with coax. I'm sure you've seen those types of cables before. Moving into twisted pair cabling, now you're going to have two or more copper wires twisted together and enclosed in the sheath. So this would have two copper wires, and they're twisted around each other. This is common for Ethernet networks, your telephone lines, short to medium distances, and again, it can support 10 gigs over a distance of 100 meters. So 100 meters is a very short distance. Think about if you have your laptop and you want to plug it into your modem here, you might have an Ethernet cord that then spans out to your laptop, and you plug the Ethernet cord from your laptop into your router, your Wi-Fi router, instead of going over the Wi-Fi. Then you have a Ethernet connection, a physical connection, instead of an air solution for Wi-Fi, sending a different type of signal to your Wi-Fi router. Very short. Think of Ethernet, your telephone cables, etc. And you can have a bunch of different types of twisted pair cabling. This is getting into Cat 5, 6, and 7. It's probably going to go pretty in depth in your A+ material, but as far as an overall career in tech, you should just be aware of cables, the different types that are out there, and again, distance and common use cases for them. Moving into fiber optic cabling, this is the fastest and greatest solution you can get. Maybe you've heard your internet service provider tell you you're eligible for fiber optic cabling as opposed to coax. Well, you get to move away from the copper inner sheath and you're moving into thin glass or plastic fiber surrounded by a protective coating and an outer jacket. So this is going to cover very long distances at very high speeds. But of course, that comes with a high price. So fiber optic cabling, it'll do a great job, but it's going to be way more expensive than using a copper or coax cable. It can support high data rates, 100 gigs over distances of several kilometers. So again, lots of bandwidth and transmission for speed and the throughput of data that's going to go across the wire here. It can go span many distances, and as we'll talk about later, fiber optic cabling really is the backbone of the internet for all of the cords that connect us globally within the world. So think about it for telecommunications, it says right here, internet backbone networks, and other applications where high bandwidth and long distances are required. It's also going to be the most expensive, and it's going to use light. It's going to send light in the form of electrical signals to transmit the data, where with copper, it's not going to use light. It's going to have the electrical signals sent through over a copper medium instead of a light, thin glass medium that you get with fiber. Cat5 cabling, mentioned that again. Just wanted to make you aware, this common Ethernet port that you have in your home, this is, you should probably know, an RJ45 connector or adapter to be able to take this cord and give it this adapter right here so that you can plug this into the Ethernet port on your laptop or computer that you're trying to have a physical Ethernet connection with. The inside of this part of the cable right here is exactly this. It's going to have that twisted pair that we mentioned, 4 pairs of copper wires twisted together, enclosed in some insulation in the outer sheath, and mostly want you to think Ethernet, RJ45 adapter, and short distance, 100 meters or less. And think of small business networks. You're typically in your home if you're using Ethernet to run from, your Wi-Fi that's upstairs down to your hacker basement where your computer is. You're going to run an Ethernet cord from your router to the basement, and Cat6 and Cat7 for larger enterprise networks, whereas Cat5, we're talking this, RJ45, and we have that twisted pair cabling again. This is meant to be an introduction to these concepts so that when you go on to have your higher learning through your formal education for whatever certification you're going for, this won't be the first time you're hearing about cables. So just brought out the major ones being copper, your coax, fiber, light and very fast, and then your Ethernet, different forms of Cat 5, 6, and 7 cords that you can have. Okay, bear with me as I try to explain how the internet works for sending data. Now, this is usually where I lose people, and I often say, just hit the I believe button for now and try and stay with me as we go through this concept that will probably make your mind explode. As we talked about in the earlier mods, everything in computers is dealt with in ones and zeros. That is never going to change. If we have you over here, let's say you have your phone and you also have your laptop, and you want to talk to someone. Let's put the Atlantic Ocean here. This is a drawing of the Atlantic. Let's say that we're in America, North America, Florida, something like this. And then over here, I cannot even attempt to draw like the UK, but this will be the UK. And we have the giant Atlantic Ocean in between us. Now, let's start at a basic example, and let's just say we're going to communicate with someone in California for someone who's over in Connecticut. How do you transmit data from on your phone or your laptop over the internet to someone in California? Well, let's stick with the example of just the laptop for now. Let's say you're at home, you're using Wi-Fi. Your laptop will send a signal through the air over Wi-Fi to your home router, which will be connected in your house through coax cabling, which will then go out to, the telephone pole that's out there. It has all the boxes on it. If you look at the outside of your house, you're going to have a cord that runs from wherever you plugged it in on the inside of your house for that coax cabling out to the side of your house. And then from your house, it's going to go out to the street, or maybe it goes underground, depending on where you live. And it's going to connect to another cord to send out to wherever your ISP's provider data storage is, wherever they host their services for their cords, to provide you with access to the larger cabling network that is the internet. So sticking with this example, we've gone with our laptop in our home to our router, out the signal through the coax cable to maybe the telephone pole that's out there. And from there, we push the I believe button to have all of our cords and routing go through the streets, underground, wherever, to get to where our internet service providers' cables are running. And from there, it's going to hop from one cable connection to the next until it gets all the way from California to Connecticut. It's doing this through all of the different cords that we just discussed. So from here to maybe your telephone pole to where that cord goes out from your house, maybe that's using coax and that copper type cord. But when you get to your ISP and you get into routing from cords that are going to take you from here to there, that's always going to be fiber optic. These are going to be the faster, longer data cords that are going to string your signals from one location to the next, spanning several kilometers. And remember, everything is in ones and zeros. So your computer, whatever, if you're sending an email, that email is going to be composed of ones and zeros. It's going to be sent and converted signal-wise into an electrical signal that goes into the copper cord. Those ones and zeros are going to travel along that cord, make it to the other cable that's strung up on your telephone pole or wherever. Maybe it's still copper, but it's probably fiber optic already at this point. And it will travel through all of the cord systems that make up the backbone of the internet. And those ones and zeros will travel from where you are in California all the way to the person in Connecticut. And it's all going to be through the light signals, through electrical pulses of copper or whatever type cord you're using. But those ones and zeros are traveling across a system of cables. Now, let's say we had a friend in London. How is this person going to communicate with us if we're still over in America or in the States? Believe it or not, they're going to follow the same exact approach to using their laptop or their phone. They're going to have their router in their home that connects them to their coax cable to send them out to the street to where all of the cords run out, and then their internet service provider, wherever their cords reside or whatever routes they have set up, will give them access to another cable that runs, yes, the cables run all the way across the ocean. There are cables underneath the water that traverse all points globally, not just the Atlantic Ocean. So think of the world, transatlantic cable that will transport all of the ones and zeros. This is happening faster than you can imagine because we're dealing with fiber, and it's using light signals to transport your ones and zeros over the cable, through the ocean, to whatever ISP lands over here, and then that will follow whatever series of cords gets you to this home in Connecticut. Now, we're going to pause here and just let you digest this. There's a lot of things that happen here that we can be breaking down, but this is a high-level overview of how your ones and zeros get transported globally. Now, we're going to talk later about packets and frames and routing and different protocols that can happen here. And for now, just be aware that your ones and zeros kind of get grouped up into different packages, and these packets kind of get sent across the wire over the internet, and you can have, hundreds, thousands of packets be sent with all of your data containing your ones and zeros just shot over the wire there through the electrical signals or light signals until they get reassembled based on sequence numbers. So if this was the first part of your message, the second part, the third part, there's protocols in place with networking that keep track of all of this to then reassemble it in the right order of packets so that your email or a video or whatever bits you were requiring of movies, emails, a song, whatever, get assembled in the correct order. Now, let's move on to the second example of someone using a phone. This is going to be a bit different, as when you have your phone, you might notice that you have 5G or 4G. Now you're using like the satellite tower available to you based off of your cable provider, whether that's Verizon or AT&T, Sprint, if they're even still around. Whichever phone provider you have, you're going to leverage a different type of signal to travel over a different protocol to then connect you to satellite of your phone provider, and then that will go out to like a satellite that exists out here, and then the signal will come back down to, let's say if we had talking to someone in the UK, if you make a phone call or send an email on your phone, it will reach that person's cable, it will reach that person's mobile phone provider, and they will get the signal from there. It will go to their mobile phone in the form of 4G, 5G, LTE data, cellular data that they're using, and they'll receive it on the other end. So not everything is transmitted in this giant cable. The giant cable is the backbone of the internet, but depending on what technology you're using, what internet service provider or phone provider you're using, there are different ways to hop through transmitting ones and zeros across the network. This is, in essence, how the internet works. We're going to talk about later how to do different protocols for if we wanted to access a website or something. We're going to talk about DNS. We're going to talk about TCP and UDP. We're going to talk about different protocols there are for accessing the web, like HTTP and HTTPS. All of this data in ones and zeros will kind of follow a certain model and a structured schema that we'll get into for how to transmit your ones and zeros over the world. But this is a very high-level overview of how the internet works based on your basic introduction to cabling, our ones and zeros concepts that we have talked about, and how your bits of ones and zeros get transported from different locations and in the world. We could have, probably a 4-hour lecture on how the internet works, and there would still be more information to give you based on the different granularities that you can go into for how this works. But just push the I believe button. Everything is sent in ones and zeros across some sort of signal, whether that's through cables, satellites, cell towers, etc., converted into different signals along the way and transported to someone on the sending end to the receiving end. One last point we want to mention, we touched on cell towers and satellite communications, but if you've heard of SpaceX, our boy Elon Musk over there running Tesla, he's also got a company called SpaceX. And what you might have heard in the news for his support to go over to Ukraine and provide internet access to people is his project. Just one small piece of his project is called Starlink. Starlink is not going to use those giant cords that run across the ocean to connect people in the world. he's not doing that. He's taking it a step further, and he's using satellites to provide high-speed internet across users around the world, particularly in areas where traditional broadband infrastructure, aka cords and fiber optics, is not available. So what he's able to do is, if you're in a rural area and you have your house here, that does not look like a house. If you have your house, you can order a Starlink satellite dish to be put onto your home, and then that satellite will reach out to the other satellites that are in orbit, constantly spinning the globe. Another thing to just kind of push the I believe on, if this is Earth, we're coded in a bunch of satellites constantly orbiting the Earth to perform data transmission and other functions. But there are thousands of satellites like this that just encompass the Earth and completely surround it and are constantly transmitting data and doing whatever other functions I don't even know about for use case of satellite transmissions for data. So instead of this person in the rural area having to have, their coax cable go out and then route through the telephone pole that's out here to then go to their ISP, the person in the rural area that doesn't have that infrastructure set up to run cords like we do in modern places of America, Elon will give you a satellite, you put the satellite dish on your house, and then you'll have access to the internet through satellite communications. That will then come down and grab one of the giant, satellite dishes that are present on land and transfer it to the giant backbone of the internet that is your cords and routing and wherever else the data is trying to go. So just a little blurb here. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation that consists of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit. That's all of these guys, all the satellites. And these satellites communicate with each other using laser links. Of course, Elon is not going to use light, not going to use copper. He's going to use lasers, as well as ground stations and user terminals. So the satellite dish is installed on the user's premises using radio waves. To access Starlink, the user must have the satellite dish and modem on their premises, which communicate to the Starlink satellites overhead. And it's going to continue to deploy more satellites, more dishes, and it's continued to do a great service of offering internet service to selected areas in several countries. And especially, in modern times, at the recording of this video in 2023, Elon has sent so many of these satellite dishes over to Ukraine to support those whose infrastructure was destroyed, ruined, blown up, so that people can still have that basic function of being able to connect to the internet. And again, Starlink hopes to provide internet access to more users around the world and continue to expand. What a great project by Elon, taking internet to the next level and leveraging satellite. And of course, you can go to Starlink's website or SpaceX website and see how much it costs, but definitely going to be on the extremely high end of what you would pay. But the data cap rate, there is no limit. Obviously there's a limit because we're dealing with ones and zeros, but your internet service provider for, your gig internet, that doesn't even compare. You can get 10 gigs, 20 gigs. Satellite comms, the bandwidth is just so much larger. So could be the future. Let's hope so. Definitely appreciate everything that Elon is doing.